My first talk was just reminiscences, but this one is written by Dr. Saeidnia and myself, so I will be reading it. The transformation of a rural agrarian society to an essentially urban society in Iran happened in the second half of the 20th century. Over the past 100 years, the number of cities in Iran has increased from 36 to 1,245, and the urban population has increased from 2 million to 59 million. In the early years of the 20th century Iran, urbanization was considered and associated as a basis for development and modernization by the general public. In 1907, the first municipal laws were passed by the National Assembly of Iran. In 1930, an amendment authorized municipalities to engage in the compilation of improvement in transportation, etc. We may divide the process of master planning in Iran into three more or less distinct phases and periods. The first period, 1909 to 1966, consisted of very simple rudimentary imposition of arterial street designing and street widening projects within the prevailing framework of the existing cities. These were not based on any planning studies, scientific methodology, or consideration on urban requirements of communication. The arterial street design projects were in fact works of engineering, and strictly speaking, must not be considered as a planning process. Such plans were laid out in Iran during the First World War as a conscious process of the provision for wider use of cars. Ahvaz was the first city in Iran to have an imported car in the year 1912. The relative widespread use of cars in Iran goes back to the 1930s, but in reality to the end of the Second World War. The first contemporary and rudimentary arterial street design plan in Iran was drawn up in 1929 for the city of Hamadan by the German engineer Karl Frisch. This was a cartwheel plan with 6 radiating avenues from a circular central maidan or roundabout. In the latter parts of the 1950s, after the Second World War, a number of city street improvements or widening plans were drawn up by foreign engineers. In 1958, the British engineer Sir Alexander Gibbs, were not really urban planners, they were sewage designers, and one of the best in the world, and they did the sewage system for Tehran as well. They're very capable consultants, but for water and sewage systems. In 1958, and they did the urban plan for Shiraz. In the same period, the United States Operations Mission to Iran, the Public Administration Division, drew up a plan for Sanandaj under the direction of Mr. Ivan Alton, who is said to have made a number of such plans for several other Iranian cities, including Urumiyeh, Kermanshah, and Bijar, for which no records have come down to us, unfortunately. You talk of the records that apparently these were made, but we don't have any of the records, unfortunately. In 1961, a more advanced level of the same arterial street design was prepared by the German engineers Koch, Pfeiffer, and von Bohr under the auspices of the, again, United States Operation Mission. This was a slightly improved version of the same thing, with the street network being somewhat integrated within the overall existing city structure. These were called director plans, probably copied from the French terminology of plan directeur. It must be noted that all of these consisted of simple physical plans, and in terms of content, were somewhere in between the arterial street designing and the later master plans. The second phase of modern urban planning in Iran began with the founding of the Ministry of Housing and Development in 1964, which changed its name to the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development in 1974. The creation of the High Council for Urban Planning and the amended municipal bylaws, both in 1966. The purpose of the council was to promote and establish urban planning policies and master plans for all Iranian cities by commissioning of the task to qualified private sector urban planning consulting firms. The members of the council were made up of 12 ministers who were considered to have some direct or indirect involvement in the urban planning process. They were also responsible for the review and approval process of the urban plans. This has been the most important and significant single urban planning activity conducted in the field of urban planning in modern Iran. The first activity of the Ministry of Housing and Development consisted of the commissioning of 14 master plans for the major cities of Iran, 7 of which were carried out by the Borbor consultants, the most active firm of the time in the field. Concurrently, a number of professional institutions were established, including the Society of Iranian Architects and the Syndicate of Iranian Consulting Architects and various other associations. The compilation of these master plans constituted the de facto start of the modern urban planning process in Iran. For the first time, the preparation of urban plans were based on comprehensive local surveys and studies, survey analysis, the forecasting and projection in 3 time spans of the first 5 years, and the two consecutive 10-year periods, etc. They included local urban studies and the list of duties prioritized by the plan and budget organization according to the pattern of survey, and so on. This strengthened the rationalization of group decision-making for the establishing long-term analysis and the future expansion in the field of urban planning in Iran. A number of appropriate bylaws for urban planning were also enacted. Although these were very important steps and positive achievements, they had their shortcomings. Some of the problems included were the complete unpreparedness of the municipalities to implement the plans, either financially or technically. The plans having been somewhat imposed on the municipalities and their being incapable of implementing the plans led to an overall negative reaction and opposition from the municipal authorities. Insufficient provision for a democratic participation of the citizens led to widespread antipathy from the local population. A lack of the political considerations combined with a lack of synchronization at the executive level created a negative attitude from various public authorities, in spite of the fact that their ministers had been involved in the process of the approval of the proposed plans. The domination of an architectonic attitude rather than a planning attitude in a number of plans which were prepared by essentially architectural firms involved some major problems and technical shortcomings in some of the planning proposals. After the Islamic Revolution, as is understandable, the whole concept of the theoretical and the practical foundations of planning, which is essentially long-term in nature, came to be questioned. The revolutionary spirit required quick, easy-to-execute planning solutions. The demand for a large supply of low-cost housing to be speedily made available to the proletariat was the most important of all the issues. Consequently, master plans were more or less put aside, and the authorities concentrated on neighborhood planning or planned unit development. Large parcels of land were allocated to the reconstruction of low-cost housing. This has not been an altogether unsuccessful methodology. Its main criteria of success having been in the fact that it involved extensive individual private participation. The relative success of this procedure encouraged the authorities to decide to build several neighborhoods within the environs of the larger cities to house the low-income groups. 14 new cities were proposed to be constructed in this system, 12 of which have been built and more or less settled. The resulting experience opened the way for new concepts and policies such as the so-called structural strategic plans. Based on this theory, the first structural and strategic plans were drawn up for Tehran in 2007. The preparation for this plan was allotted to the Urban Development Planning Authority of Tehran. This organization was put together with the assistance of the Ministry of Housing and Development and the Tehran municipality to cooperate with each other in order to provide a joint project for the Tehran metropolis. The shortcomings of this type of plan were also quickly brought to light. They are as follows. Yes, I'm near the end. These projects do not have the backing of the necessary bylaws. The zoning policies suggested by the new plans have met considerable resistance, and substantial sums of the funds were misappropriated and used illegally by municipal agents. The implementation of the plans requires reform on the organizational, legal, and administrative levels of the system. And this faces major opposition from the current municipal authorities. The whole concept of the plan unit development is based on the idea of general public participation. But in order for this important event to happen, the proper mechanism has not yet been put into place. The existing neighborhood councils do not have the necessary social and legal status to smoothly run these entities. The effects and the results of the performance of a plan unit development requires the enactment of a special process named as the subjective and the objective process. The implementation of this process is not carried out due to lack of funding and non-participation of the sector. In conclusion, and taking into consideration a century of urban planning experimentation, which includes 50 years of comprehensive urban planning and a decade of planned unit development in Iran, much valuable experience has been gained. However, the implementation of most urban plans have faced numerous legal, financial, and collaborative limitations. Urban planning, however, has become an important benchmark in the everyday life of the general public. As far as the society is concerned, the people have become acquainted with the new concepts of urban planning from a rational desire to improve the standards of city life according to the principles and regulations of urban planning. And they are demanding that the government and the municipality implement these. The level of participation by citizens in the elections for the city councils and the protests against policies such as the illegal sales of extra square meters of land use density called Tarakum show the deep awareness and familiarity developed by the society vis-à-vis urban planning and design. This same familiarity will hopefully lead to eventual sustainable urban development and improve the quality of the urban environment. Thank you.